How do you find the slope of a line? So recall that slope measures how steep a line is. And so there are a few ways you can measure how steep a line is. And so the first thing we're going to talk about is what the slope actually equals. So we've been using, if you watched the previous video about linear equations, graphing linear equations, then we have been using m to represent the slope. And slope is equal to rise over run. That means how much do I have to rise and how much do I have to run to get from one point to the next. So that's one way of finding the slope. If you have the slope intercept form, which is y equal mx plus b, then the number that's in front of the x is your slope. So that's another way to find the slope. And now there is a slope formula which measures the rise over the run, which is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So where does that formula come from? So if you have two random points, so this is x1, y1, and another random point, x2, y2, and there's a line that goes through those 2 points, then the slope would be how much do you rise this distance and how much do you run this distance to get from one point to the next. Well, this distance here is going to be the change in y. So that's going to be your y2 minus your y1. And then this distance here is going to be your change in x, which is going to be your x2 minus your x1. So this is x2 minus x1. And this distance here is y2 minus y1. And so that's exactly what this formula is measuring. It's measuring the change in the y over the change in x, which is the same as the rise over run. So you can also call that delta y over delta x, where delta represents change. So these are ways you can find the slope. So let's look at some examples. Example 1, we want to find the slope of a line that passes through the points -4, 1, and 2, -2. And so basically we have 2 points, -4, 1, and 2, -2. And we just basically want to assign each of those points as x1, y1, and x2, y2. So this one is first, so I'm going to call it x1, y1, and this one is second, I'm going to call it x2, y2. And it doesn't matter which one you assign, you can go either way. And so now I just want to basically use the formula, which is the change in y over change in x. If you can remember that it's the change in y over change in x, then you don't have to actually remember that it's y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So if you're good with remembering formulas, then you can remember that. But if you can learn the concept, it's the difference in the y's, the rise, over the difference in the x's, then you don't have to get confused with the y2s and the y1. So the change in y, so it's going to be -2 minus 1 over the change in x, which is 2 minus -4. -2 minus 1 is -3. 2 minus a -4 is +6. And that can be reduced. 3 go into both of those. So if I divide each by 3, 3 goes into 3 one time, and 3 goes into 6 2 times. So your slope would actually be -1/2. And that's how you find the slope, using that slope formula or the concept of change in y over change in x. Example 2, I want to find the slope of this line. And this line has two points labeled on it, -3, -2, and 2, 5. So you could actually use those points and plug them into the slope formula, y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Or since you have the graph, you can actually just count the rise over run. So pick one point to start at and then count how much you have to rise and run to get to the next point. So if I start right here, I want to figure out how much do I have to go up to get to that next point. So I have to go up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So my rise will be 7. So once I go up 7, how many points do I have to go over to get to that point? I have to go over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 points. So my run would actually be 5. And I went up in a positive direction, so it would be +7. And I went right in a positive direction, so it would be +5. So my slope will be 7 over 5. And I found that by actually counting. The rise over the run. Example 3, we also want to find the slope of this graph. Now this is the graph of a horizontal line, and it's the equation y equal 2. So we learned previously in a previous video that a horizontal line is of the form y equal to a number. And since this is going through the y value of 2, this is y equal to 2. If I want to find the slope of this, I could actually use these 2 points labeled on the line and plug them into the formula y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1 and calculate that. Or since I have the graph, I could just count how much do I rise and how much do I run to get from one point to the next. So if I start at this point, how much do I have to go up or down to get to that point? I don't have to go up or down any because it's on the same y value. So my rise would actually be 0. Well, how much do I have to run to get to the next point? I have to run 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So my run would actually be 6. So my slope is 0 divided by 6. Well, 0 divided by any number is 0. That's like saying if I have $0 and I must divide it and split it up between 6 people, how much will each person get? Each person will get $0. So 0 divided by any number is 0. So the slope of this horizontal line would be 0. And that's the case for all horizontal lines. So remember that slope measures the steepness of the line. So if I have a line that's just straight like this, how steep is it? So if I'm trying to walk on this, if I'm a person walking on this line, is there any resistance? No, it's not steep at all. There's no resistance. And so in this case, it has no slope, a slope of 0. Example 4, we want to find the slope of this graph. Now, this is the graph of a vertical line. This is a vertical line going through the x value of 3. So the equation for this graph will be x equal 3 because recall that a vertical line is an equation of the form x equal to a number. And so if I wanted to find the slope of this line, I could use these 2 points that are identified on the line and plug them into the slope formula. Or I could just count how much do I have to rise and how much do I have to run since I have the graph in order to get from one point to the next. So if I choose to start with this point, how much do I have to rise? This is 3, negative 2. How much do I have to rise to get to 3, 1? I have to rise 1, 2, 3. So my rise would be 3. Well, how much do I have to run to get to that point and go over? I don't have to go over any since they're on top of each other. And so my run would be 0. Well, anytime you divide by 0, that's considered undefined. So that means that this vertical line has an undefined slope. And that's the case with all vertical lines because if you go from one point to the next, you'll never have to run anywhere. And so that denominator will always be 0. And so when you think about what slope is, it's the measure of how steep the line is. This line, could you walk on it? Nope, unless you're Spider-Man. You can't walk on this line. And so this line is so steep that you can't walk on it and that we cannot define its steepness. So the slope is undefined. Now you try this one. Find the slope of a line that passes through these 2 points. So pause the video for a moment and see if you can find the slope of this line. Okay, so remember slope is the change in y over the change in x, or you can say rise over run, or you can remember the formula y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So again, if you remember that it's change in y, that means the difference in the y's over change in x, which that means the difference in the x's. You can just subtract the difference between those, or you can actually label these as x1, y1, x2, y2 and plug them in. So it'll be 6 minus negative 8 over 4 minus negative 3. 2 negatives, the minus and negative becomes a positive, so this is 6 plus 8, which is 14, and this is 4 plus 3, which is actually 7. 14 divided by 7 is 2, so you end up with the slope of 2. Hopefully you got that right. If you didn't get it right, check your work. You probably made just a simple error, so go back and look at it. A lot of times people will switch the x's and the y's, put the x's on the top and the y's on the bottom, so make sure you don't do that. The y's have to go on top. Change in y over change in x. If you have any questions whatsoever, make sure you put them in the comments below. And then if you haven't already, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Thanks again for tuning in.